I'll turn it over to Thurman Miller, who lives out in North Plains, lives way out west, and is retired and now a professional furniture maker with a company named Beyond the Edge. So with that, Thurman, thanks for being here tonight.
Great. I'm glad to be here, Gary. So, hi, my name's Thurman, and I'm glad to be here, and hopefully we'll impart some knowledge, and it'll be helpful in your woodworking projects that you have. One of the questions that Gary asked me when I did this is, why do you want to do this? What's your purpose? What would you like to have at the end of this class? And part of me looks at it and says, I look back at my own journey where I was at many years ago, and I used to put projects off a lot. I would think about them, and I would think about them for weeks or months on end. And part of what I want to do is to get people excited and give you enough information to say, hey, I want you to start a project within the next 2 weeks. I'd love for you to be able to take some of these tips and give you the confidence to say, yes, I can do this, and I'm going to go and do this project. So really, that's what I want, is I want more people doing woodworking and creating really cool things out for their house, for their friends, for their family, and so doing that. This, when I first started doing this, the presentation grew and grew to a point where I said, this is impossible to get it done in an hour. So we broke it into two. We're going to have part one today. I've kind of divided up some of these tips into design and planning, which seemed more appropriate. And then part two, which will be next Wednesday, I'll get into more of the general tips. It's just a ragtag of different things that I put together. So with that, let me give you a little bit of background on me. I started young. I was 22 years old. I took a second bedroom in an apartment that I lived in, put down plastic and plywood. I had a circular saw, I had a straight edge, and I had a router. And I made a entertainment center, and I made a couch. And I did those because we would go to the store and we would see these things, and I would say, geez, I can make that. You know, I don't need to spend $1,000 or whatever it was back then on making that. And so that's all I had. I started off with a circular saw, router with a few bits, and a straight edge, and a few clamps to clamp the straight edge down to the wood as I was working. And back then we didn't have the internet; we just had books and things like that. So I kind of graduated. I went to when I got my first house, I ran my table saw out of my basement, which was shared with the laundry room. So you can imagine my wife wasn't really happy with all of the sawdust that was being generated down in this one open room. And then we moved to Oregon, and I built my log house. It took 2 years, and I was 27 years old at the time when I started building it. And it was about not quite 4,000 square feet. And we've lived here, and I had a rolling shop out of my garage, where I had a side room off my garage. I had all my tools and on wheels, and I would take the cars out and I would wheel all my tools out, do woodworking, and then wheel all my tools back in and pull the cars back in. Did that for probably 7 or 8 years. And then finally in 2000, I built a shop, which you see kind of, I'm using a virtual background. That's my back of my shop. It's a 40 by 30 shop. And so what I wanted to do, though, is really point out that, you know, you don't need fancy tools. You don't need a fancy shop. What you need is determination and a little bit of desire to be able to create woodworking. You do really not need a bunch of tools. And I'm going to go through some of the tools in part two, where I think you don't need a joiner, you don't need a planer. You can use other things that are much cheaper, much smaller, depending upon the space that you have. So I really wanted to point out that, yes, I do have a nice shop now, but I didn't start off that way, and you don't need to have that to be successful in doing woodworking. So where did I turn the corner? Where did I go when I was a hobbyist woodworker to start really, I think my thinking changed, and I was remodeling my kitchen in my house. And I had ordered this vent hood, and it showed up in a box with no instructions and no way to how to attach wood to it. The best way to do it so I could mount it on the wall, as you see in the picture down there. And it sat there for 2 weeks, and I just kept thinking about it, looking at it, and I was analysis paralysis. I just was struggling. And finally, one night, it was late. It was like 11 o'clock at night. It was crazy. And I just grabbed it, went up to the shop, grabbed a bunch of 1x4s that I had laying around. And an hour later, I was done. And I just started measuring and cutting, and I created a form all the way around it. And I think that's really the part where I just turned a corner. And I don't know if any of you have that same issue where you think and think and think about too much about doing it, because it's very complicated. When you do a woodworking project, you have friends and family, and they go to the store and they buy something for $300. And I'll tell you right off, there's no way you're ever going to build that for $300. Because those companies are building thousands and tens of thousands of those things. And they have got a supply chain and a manufacturing line that is very specific. They don't adjust table saws. They don't adjust routers. They have a dedicated table saw to rip one piece of wood, and that's what it does. And it's completely different. So we can't look at perfection that comes off of stores and things like that. That's been, iterated on multiple times before they get it right, to what we're doing. Because when we do a woodworking project, it's always unique. It's always the first time this thing has probably been built. Maybe you've been working off some plans that someone else came up with, but really it's a unique project with a unique wood that you're doing and doing that. So think about how you can turn that corner from looking at all your nice tools and getting to doing woodworking. And one just last final thought on this slide is, if you make a mistake during construction, it's only a fourth of the labor. So when you look at a total completed project in terms of getting your wood, cutting it, gluing it, sanding it, and putting a finish on it, your mistakes are always in the construction part. Yeah, finishing, you can make mistakes. Actually, you can make mistakes with all of those, and hopefully I'll help you today and next week help you. But it's really a small part, and usually you're not having to throw away the whole thing. Although I did have to do that once on a cabinet, so it happens. I want to introduce a new paradigm, or maybe it's a new paradigm. I don't know. I have really gotten away from being specific on measurements when I build things. I look at the design, I focus on the design aspects of it and how it's going to go together. But as far as measuring down to the 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch, I'm usually not even worried about that, because a project has so many dependencies on it. And this is a hall table that I recently did, and I wanted to use that because I think it really highlights how things are so dependent. Now, my overall boundary or my guardrail on this project, believe it or not, was my drawer slides. So I have drawer slides that are 12 1/4 inches long. They're push to open, and I needed those to fit in this space, some from front to back. So that was my one limiting factor, that I had to have at least 12 1/4 inches to be able to fit that drawer slide. Now, when I start looking at all the other things, and I look at the legs, and I label the legs A, they originally, I was like, okay, they're going to be around 2 inches, plus or minus 1/8 of an inch. And again, I don't get hung up on exactly making it 2 inches, because when I get that lumber in and I put it through my joiner and I get it flat, and then I go through my planer to get an equal dimension on all 4 sides, I don't care that's 2 inches. I care that it's square and it's flat. And if it comes out at 1 7/8, fine. If it comes out 2 1/4, hey, fine, I don't care. It's what it ends up being after I've dimensioned my lumber. Now, if you look at the top and the bottom shelf, the top extends 1.5 inches over the edges that the bottom shelf doesn't do. And so when I went to say, okay, what's my top shelf width? Now, this is very interesting because, you'll see later as I go through this, but the design was originally 4 feet 7 inches wide at the top. Well, we got a slab down at Sustainable Northwest, which is a beautiful Madrone slab. And once I got it once I taped it out, I thought we had enough room. But once I got it in my shop and I squared it up, those slabs don't come with square ends. In fact, they can be pretty off by 1 or 2 inches. And once I got it squared up, there was no way I was going to get 4 feet 7. So I actually knocked it down 3 inches to 4 feet 4, which completely adjusted everything else. But because that was the way that I approached the project, it didn't matter. It wasn't even a blip. It was just, oh, okay, I just need to take the bottom shelf needs to be 3 inches shorter than the top shelf. I don't care what measurement it was. So I really want you to think about your projects, not with specific measurements in mind, but what order are you going to build the parts, and what order should you be doing them in that will dictate the size of the project. Now, this is going to change on everybody's project, but you need to look at your project and see what order should I be doing these in. You know, if I look at my drawer width, the very last thing is my H. You can't plan for a 15-inch wide drawer. You need to fit the space that you have in the opening, and you know those uprights that are labeled G. What thickness are they going to be at? Are they exactly 3/4 of an inch, or like me, you know, it might be 7/8, it might be 5/8. I don't know. I don't care. It's when I get it done and I have that piece and I put it in, and then I have my overall width. Now I'm going to divide it into 3 equal spots, but I don't care about which one that they may be a certain size. So if I could do one thing tonight and it would change the way that you approach woodworking is don't get so fixated on a specific measurement. I used to do that. My first kitchen that I did, that remodel that I showed you when I remodeled that vent hood, I had an Excel spreadsheet that had every single cabinet. I did 40 cabinets, and I had an Excel spreadsheet that was down to the 1/8 of an inch. And let me tell you what, I did all this planning and all this worked out, and I was so ready to go, and it fell apart on the very first cabinet. So don't worry about those measurements. And that's something that I learned, and I really think it will help you be a much better woodworker if you think about it in terms of dependency and not specific measurements. So just to give you an idea, and I don't want to get into math, but I thought this was kind of funny because I have 3 sons. They're all grown, except for my youngest one. He's just graduating high school this year. But throughout their career in school, I always joked and said, you know, woodworking is one of the few things that I actually use algebra on a fairly routine basis. And whenever I'm designing something, I can plug the numbers that I get into these, and it gives me the answer for a piece that I'm going to be cutting, but not that I'm designing. So there's probably some mistakes in here. I don't want you to look over this and make sure it's all there, but it shows that the dependency really highlights on those pieces. So I want to kind of branch off a little bit more now in terms of design space. So when you're designing something, and if I look at this whole table, and I'm going to bring this over here, there's a lot of resources on the web, and I do this routinely, and I would encourage you all to do this as well, which is go on to any of your favorite search engines, and I listed a bunch here. I happen to be pulling up Google Images at this point, but when you go through the hall table designs, there are some astoundingly creative people out there. And I'm not saying you have to be the creative person and come up with your own new design, but what I'm saying is that take aspects of what you see that others have done and try to see if you can come up with your own design when you do that. And this will give you a lot of things. You can click on these that people are selling. You'll get height, you'll get widths. You'll notice that they're not all the same. Hall table varies from about 22.5 inches tall to about 36 inches tall. What height do you want it to be? So and that goes into your house. And what other things do you want to do with it? Do you want the hall table to be a standalone in a hall? Or do you want it to be a sofa table that goes on the back of a sofa? Well, then you probably want it close to the height of your back of your sofa. But, what happens if you get a new sofa? What happens then? So this is a really good resource. And there's a lot of these resources out here in, Google, Bing, Reddit. I have been using Reddit for the last year. I didn't use it for a long time. I always heard a bad thing about Reddit. But the woodworking forum is absolutely amazing. These people are so creative. And I save a lot of stuff I see other people do just as a inspiration. It's something that says, wow, that's a really cool thing you just did. There was one that someone did with a simple little napkin holder that I just absolutely adored. And I was like, man, that's something I'm going to start using for my scraps. And I can hand out that gift for other, for during holidays and people's birthdays and stuff like that. Imager is another one that you think of what's got a lot of memes and a lot of other things. But if you focus on woodworking and you go do a search on hall table on Imager, you'll come up with different things. So these are good suggestions for you to go look at. What are options for things that you can do? What is it that you like? When you see a design, what is it that, go back to this table again. What are some of these things that you appreciate? What would look good in your house? What type of wood do you currently have? So this just gives you an idea that you don't have to go with one design. Plans are now or whatever. You can come up with your own. And there's a lot of options that you can do. I happen to have my wife is a great muse. She's given me a lot of projects. And sometimes when she mentions something, it just clicks and snaps and I go and I build it. I just recently did a bathroom vanity where she came up with the idea. She said, I only want 2 drawers, and I want them to extend over the edge of where the normal drawer would be and hide the toilet, not the toiletry part, the plumbing underneath the sink. And I was like, okay, yeah, I get it. I've never seen anything like that. I've never seen anything done that, but she came up with that idea that she wanted that. And I was like, yeah, I can build that. And that's cool when you do something that somebody else wants you to do that you've never seen happen before. So just to hopefully it gives you some ideas of how you can get a lot of really good ideas when you go to build something. So and this page is really just down to 2 things, which is, as a woodworker, we almost have an insurmountable number of things that we need to do on a project. You got to figure out what joinery you're going to use, how you're going to attach tops, what finish are you going to use, what type of wood are you going to use, what thickness are you going to do the wood to. There's just all these different things. And what I would do is always try one new thing that you've never done before. Whether it's a certain type of joint, whether it's a certain drawer slide or a hinge that you've never done, that you said, for years, boy, I'd say the first 5 or 6 years I was in this house, I used the old traditional hinges, that would go butterfly hinge that you would screw into both sides and you see the whole hinge. And I just couldn't figure out in my head how those hinges worked in those cabinets that you always see in the stores, where the cabinet's hidden and they have this round hole. And it's like, God, my head just exploded with too many options. It was like, how are you doing this? And one day I was over at Rockler and they had one of those jigs. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do one of those, and let me tell you that you're going to learn a lot because there's so much with those closed hinges, opening angle, whether it's overlay, how much of an overlay, and your mind is going to explode even more once you get into that world. But once you do it, it's like, oh, this wasn't so hard, right? It was something that I worried too much about. But but challenging myself on something new was really good. The other thing is I wouldn't go crazy. Don't try so many new techniques that you just get overwhelmed. I would really say try to limit the number of new techniques you do to 1 or 2, and that will keep you so that you are doing things that are mostly familiar, but maybe one new thing that you have to do. So everything is a first at one time. When you go and do woodworking, there's always going to be so many firsts. And over the next several years or however long you've been doing woodworking, you're going to have 50 new firsts. It's incredible what you've done. New finishes, new joints, new hardware. And it's an accumulation of knowledge that's going to help you with your projects. So hopefully that will also spur you to look at something and say, maybe this design shows a certain type of joint, but I've never done a half blind dovetail, or I've never done a half lap, or I've never done a bridle joint. You know, can I do that joint on this project and see what it's like? Maybe you'll give it a shot. So when we talk about design, I always try to make the design mine in some way, shape, or form. I'll get a lot of ideas from different people and different projects, but I really own the design that I do, and I want to fit the space, because I do a lot of coffee tables. I do a lot of big slabs. I do a lot of things, and this project here was a really wow, crazy. This person came to me and said, I want a box from my sword. And I was like, that's interesting. And so he showed me his sword. It's a $5,000 sword. This is a Conan replica that is like done to the nth thing. It's a really nice sword. And I was like, wow, you know, that's a long sword. I mean, that's over, I think it was like 45 or 46 inches long. And I said, if I can build you a box for it, that's fine, but you're just going to stick it some back room, and then you're going to have to pull it out, and no one's going to see it. I go, what if we did something where we incorporated it into a table where it would just be there and it would be under glass and seen? He says, whoa, we could do something like that? And I was like, yeah, we can do that. And so I came up with this design. We worked through several different iterations. We were going to have the top hinge, but the hinges, he was really particular about not having a lot of dust or crevices, and the hinges would, you know, be raised up over the glass. And so he was like, well, could we hold off on the hinges until later and do that? And I was like, yeah, we could do that. There'll be a certain point where we have to make a decision. But up until that point, yeah, we can continue on. So if you notice a drawing on the left that I did in SketchUp and the one on the right, there's a lot of differences. And I'm not an expert at SketchUp. I'm pretty fast. I know the basics really, really well, and I can crank stuff out really good, but I can't do like miter joints. I haven't figured out how to do a miter joint in SketchUp. Maybe somebody else here could show me at some point. But the drawing is got the point across, and I could talk to those differences. Like the tapered legs. If you look at the legs on this, they taper down. And on the drawing, they didn't. But I knew they were going to taper down because I think it would look better. And so I could describe that to my client. But my drawing, I didn't want to waste the time because it would take too long for me to try to draw tapered legs in SketchUp. It wasn't worth the time. So this is something where I would say try to own the design, make it yours in one shape or another. Make it the size you want it, make it the height you want, use a different type of wood, maybe use some different joinery, but make it yours. Make it your design that you do. So I'm gonna really go through a different way now. I've got I'm gonna take you through what the thought process was on this latest project with Hall tables, and I've got to get my SketchUp loaded. And I'm going to show you how I went through this project with my client And it's not something that you should go through. I mean, this is something, it's something you should go through when you think about your designs. So I use SketchUp, but you don't have to use SketchUp. This is just a nice tool that I've gotten used to over the years. But what I started off with is that, you know, we had a hall table. I had this wall space, and I knew what the wall space was, and I came up with, I'm going to go kind of quick here to get down to these, but I came up with several different designs just to kind of stir his imagination and where did he want to go, and show him different options for what we could do. And so this usually starts off in a very organic way where I'm coming up with different designs just to kind of, I've looked and seen what other people do. We started talking about it. He really wanted drawers. And so I said, okay, so given your wall space that you have here, if you want drawers, and I was thinking traditional drawers coming out the front like this, and I knew that I had 12¼ inches for that drawer slide, and then you add the face frame you add the face plate for the drawer, you add the back, and before you knew it, we were at 1 feet 3¾ inches. That's the minimum I could make that. Now, the problem that I noticed when I came up with this design was that you really want the same distance from the edge of the table to the corner as you do that it protrudes out. And this is because it'll be a 45-degree angle, and when people come around the corner when they're walking through the hall, you don't want them to jab into the edge of that table when they turn that corner, and people are always going to take that corner. They're not going to come out straight and do a 90-degree angle. They're going to cut that corner. So to really make that fit the space, I would have to make it less wide. So instead of 4 feet 10, it was going to be 4 feet 7. And that would give me down to where I now had 1 feet 3 to the edge of the wall, plus a little bit of the baseboard. And I was within what I felt was a good design to do that. And at that point, he was like, you know, that's just going to come out more than I want. I really want it to be 12 inches. And so I was like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board, right? So he wanted a drawer to put his cell phone into to charge it up. So I needed some cord management. I needed drawers. And I said, okay, well, this hasn't been done. I've never seen it being done, but I've fallen in love with push to open drawers. And I can push to open drawer on the side here. And so it really worked out nice. It's like a hidden drawer that's in there. And to give you an idea, you know, you can, and SketchUp allows me to have layers and stuff, but the drawer fits in there, and then I can start to show, you know, I got to think about how am I going to attach the top? Okay, well, I need these slats going across so that I can attach the top, and showing the different components, cord management to have a hole in here so I can have the cord coming through and coming up from where the plug-in is at. So what I wanted to show you is that this isn't just, the design isn't something, the first thing you come up with. The design is something that evolves through feedback, through looking at your environment and fitting the space that you want. So for him, this ended up being the design that we went with. And then, like I showed you here, that it was, you know, so the top was supposed to be a different length, and once we got the slabs in, we had to make it a little bit shorter, and he was okay with that. Because it would be smaller than that space, he just didn't want it coming out further than 12 inches. Then we did that. Now, it just so happened at the same time we were doing he wanted another hall table, another part of the house where it was kind of back in this little cubby, and this is where, you know, he really didn't want it to come out beyond this trim on this door. And so now I could go back to the original design where I had done, and I said, okay, I can get a drawer that will fit into this space. And he wanted to be able to put in paper and different things like that. So that was his original thing. And so we had, more than 8.5 by 11 on interior drawer sizes to be able to do that. But you'll see my construction is a little bit different on this one because of the way that I'm going to attach the top and the way the drawer slides are going to be. I need the sides for the runners on the drawer slides. And so now I have these dividers that are doing it. I'm using a web frame assembly in there. But the constraints that I had on the design was he wanted it to be about an inch away from each one of these walls. So he didn't want it to go flush. He was okay with it being a little bit further away, but he didn't want it to be a tight fit into that space. So that was important to him. This was going to be a live edge, which isn't shown on the drawing because I hate doing live edges on SketchUp. And the width constraint was he didn't want to come out beyond this trim and where it was going to go. So this is wherever you're going to build something or put something at, to really consider a lot of different angles. Where's your plug-in at? Is your shelf going to interfere with your plug-in? What are other things that could be here? Your baseboard trim. It's really important for clients and me personally, is that I have enough of an overlay on the back side of this so that I can flush it up to the wall and there won't be a gap. If I were to make the back of the table be the same as the legs, now the legs would only push up to the baseboard, and I would still have that 5/8 of an inch gap on the back. So you need to have at least a 5/8 of an inch overhang to be able to flush it up against the wall. So those are the types of things you need to consider, but it really helps if you can draw this out on graph paper. You can draw it out wherever, but draw your environment and then put your piece in there, and this will happen. I talked to Gary, and I might be volunteering for a SketchUp quick and dirty. Here's the intro to SketchUp to get people used to this if they want to learn how to do this. But I thought this would be an interesting case study to show you how I went from the first designs and we slowly iterated down to where we finally got the design that he wanted. So that's something else that I do routinely, and I would encourage people to take a design and iterate through it and know what your constraints are on your design. And maybe you don't have any constraints, but a coffee table, just to give you an idea, coffee tables are all over the place. They're anywhere from 16 inches high to 21 inches tall. Their width, what's the width of a coffee table? Well, it turns out that you really should have a coffee table be the same as your cushion length. So whatever the cushions are, not the sides of the couch, but so where the cushion meets the side of the couch, that length is the length of a coffee table. The height is the height of your cushion. So that's what it should be. But again, what happens if you build a coffee table, then they go out and buy a new sofa. So you have to think about that, but don't go off of drawings that you see or what stores are selling things for as a rule. There is no rule. The rule is what you want and what's going to fit your space. So that's the best advice that I can give you on designing, is fit the space. So what are other things we can do about design? This almost falls into the category of, I think everyone's heard this so many times they probably eyes glass over, but I want to go into a few different gotchas that have gotten me in the past and really highlight what you can do to change that. And that's wood movement. So accounting for wood movement in design is the absolute where you got to do it. And I saw this up on Imager. Somebody had done this retro 60-ish cabinet, and it was such a wonderful execution. I loved it. And it really showed all the grain and what he did. And I want to talk about what you can do here. You don't want to mix solid wood and plywood except for the back. The back is typically plywood, and that's because you have all this wood movement going on, and it's really difficult to get the back on there without leaving yourself some substantial gaps in solid wood, although you can do it, and I've done it. But let me tell you a story. So I built this little diminutive shelving unit for our bathroom. My wife wanted something that was about 4 feet tall, 2.5 feet wide. I decided to do it all solid wood. So I did it all in solid wood. And there wasn't a screw in that thing. It was all just joinery, and it fit and it looked great. And I stained it, and I put a finish on it, and I put it in my house. And a month later, I was sitting on the toilet, because when I'm sitting on the toilet, I got to face this cabinet. And the wood had shrunk. And because I had put the stain on after I had put the back on, I now had this strip of unfinished wood that is protruding in the crack of the crease of where that is at. So I had accounted for wood movement, and it didn't fall apart and didn't crack and split, because I had some moving they were elongated holes to allow the back to move, but I had forgotten about the stain, and so now I had to take the back off and retouch up that entire thing because I didn't stain the back before I did that piece. And so now another thing on this type of casework is, I say don't mix plywood and solid wood. You can, if you do a trick. And the trick is only glue the first inch. So if you use dados, if you use this little joint here at the front, and you want to, because it's interior, why do I want to use solid wood on the interior, right? I want to use plywood. Okay, you can do that if you only glue the first inch. And you give yourself a little bit of wiggle room on the back, depending upon other things. Like these sides here will usually be solid wood. The interiors won't be solid wood. So this side is going to be expanding and contracting, and we'll get to how much in a little bit. But if you glue just the first inch of this, then it'll adhere there, and the wood will stretch out in your dado. If you have a dado, hopefully, it'll stretch out in that dado as the other wood moves around that plywood. So, but you're going to run into issues if you try to mix plywood and solid wood in a case construction like this, unless you do that little trick that I told you about. But that's just something to consider on wood movement. There's other parts of wood movement that we'll get into in just a minute, but I want to talk about how much. And it really is surprising to people if you really haven't given it a lot of thought. Minimum of 1/8 of an inch per 12 inches. So if you have a 2 foot, you could be moving 1/4 of an inch. On a table that's 36 inches or even 42 inches wide, you could be looking as much as, I would say, almost 3/4 of an inch of wood movement. That's an incredible amount of wood movement. You have to really consider that in your design, and how are you going to account for that? So people sometimes just think, well, I don't have to worry about it. And the only time you don't have to worry about wood movement is if you're doing veneer, because veneer is so thin that it doesn't have enough wood tensile strength to be able to do anything crazy. But if you start dealing with any kind of thicker wood than veneer, any kind of width, you're going to need to account for it. And I know this has been taught to death for so many years in the woodworking journals and things, but hopefully I can give you a little bit more ways to get around it. So probably the best thing I've seen, and I think we just had a video that we posted at the Guild about breadboard ends and how to do breadboard ends. And it was a perfect video. And I've actually, it was funny because I went and watched it because I love watching those videos. And it was the exact same video I had watched before I did this breadboard end on this table for another client. And just to remind myself, it was like, okay, I know what it takes, but let's just go through all the steps. And it was so, that woodworker video that was linked was perfect. And it really is the perfect example, because you have a table that's so wide. I have a 48-inch table here, and it was all wood. So I'm looking up, I could be looking up close to 3/4 to an inch of wood movement that I'm going to get on that thing. And so I have some pretty aggressive holes, slots for my dowels to fit in to allow them to continue to move. But you notice that center one is just pegged, so it's glued in so that that's your anchor point, and it expands on both ways. The other way to think about it is you can do elongated holes from the bottom. And so I do this a lot, where when I'm attaching a top like I did here, I'll use elongated holes on the bottom piece of wood, and I'll put a bolt in with a threaded insert, and that with a washer, and that allows that washer to move in that space while the wood moves. So it's just something you have to consider when you do it. If you don't, you're going to have problems down the road, and problems can be split wood, cracked wood, and it could ruin the entire project. So be careful with accounting for big surfaces like these. On smaller items, we already do this, but if you've never done a frame and panel door before, one of the things that you probably see they sell at Rockler and Woodcraft is they have these things called Spaceballs. And what Spaceballs are for is this gap that you're supposed to leave in the sides of your groove. So when you do the groove for your frame and panel on your stiles and your rails, that panel has to fit in there, but it needs space because it's going to continue to expand and contract. And so they sell these Spaceballs, because what happens if you don't have Spaceballs is that your wood's going to rattle. It could loop in a winter, when this is counterproductive to people in Oregon. In the winter, your wood's going to shrink. And the reason your wood's going to shrink in the winter is because you have the heater on, and the heater's going to take the moisture out of the air, and your wood's going to shrink. In the summer, when your heater isn't on, even if it's dry out, your wood's going to expand. So in Oregon, I always tell people, if you're going to have a problem, usually it's with expansion, not contraction. So it's the middle of the summer. Another little hint: instead of using Spaceballs, take some clear silicone, lay a bead out about 12 inches long, let it get dry and hard, and just get your X-Acto knife and cut it into small pieces, and then jam it into those slots, and it's just the same as Spaceballs, and it won't even cost you $1. So that's a way to account for that. Frame and panel doors. This is where we mix solid wood, not frame and panel doors. This is called a web frame assembly. And a web frame assembly is really to hold drawers, piston fit drawers for drawer slides. And they used to do them a lot different ways. You don't need to get to this level of detail. Really, you just need the screws with the elongated holes on the inside. The stop dovetails and stuff are a nice touch. If it's not going to be seen, then it doesn't really need to be. It can be a dado that it can slide in. It can be, heck, it can just be surface screwed in with Craig screws, as long as you got to do an elongated hole for it. But that's another way to do it. So these are different ways we can account for wood movement. Another thing is on cabinets. Cabinets, you want to leave 1/4 inch on the side. And that's not so much for wood movement as it is for when you go up against a wall in a house. You're not going to find 3 straight walls in a house in Oregon, or any place for that matter. That extra 1/4 inch gives you a little bit of wiggle room so that you can fit that cabinet in and then put some trim on. So normally there's a piece of trim that you would put on the outside of this frame to be able to do that. And that's all what trim is. Trim is to hide or account for wood movement, or hide or account gaps that are going to occur naturally in a house, because no walls are straight. And if you design to you fit the cabinet into a space, leave yourself 1/4 inch on both sides, and you just put a thin piece of wood trim. They sell this wood trim. It's about 5/8 of an inch thick by, let's say, 3/16 of an inch thick by 5/8 of an inch wide. It's a standard piece of trim that you can buy in almost any hardwood store, and they come in a wide variety of species, so you can match what you're trying to do and stain it the same way, and then you can just use some brad nails to staple it up against the cabinetry so it looks nice. So that's wood movement. Let's talk a little bit about shelving and doing that. This is a calculator. I think this calculator came out when the internet came out. I've been using it for so long, it's been crazy. But Sagulator is a great tool, and it shows you whether you need an edging strip on the front of your shelf to account for sag. There's nothing worse than building a shelving unit and then it bowing in the middle because of weight. So this is a great resource. Use it if you're doing shelves or free span areas like that. Yeah. I know it's time.
Well, I just wanted to mention something that I inadvertently had forgotten to mention at the intro. We will be sending all of you this PowerPoint presentation, so you will have access to all the links and can access the material yourself. And I forgot to mention that, so I just wanted to let you know that. Okay.
Just another story about, I thought you were going about time, because I'm looking at time, I'm going, well, a little over. This is a really good story to again, adapt and change while you're building. So on the left is the design I came up with. I had these little cutouts for your hand to pull in and pull the drawer out. I just so happened to get into push to open drawers right as I was starting this new project. I just finishing another project and I really loved them. I had a client come over and said, hey, what do you think about these push to open drawers? And they loved them. And so we got rid of the hand pull. The other thing is my original design had the slab. It's a waterfall slab coming to the edge and always being flush with the front of the cabinet. And one day I happened to have a friend over and I was showing them this cabinet. And when I first put the top on, because the top is on with threaded inserts with elongated holes, and I just had it laid on there to show him and what it would look like. And I pushed it up to the front and he goes, oh no, it looks much better with a gap. And he was right. This was my original idea, but leaving this little bit of edge trim and this walnut that contrasted with this, let's see, this is chestnut. Yeah, chestnut really turned out nice. So I think you'll agree that pushing that back just a little bit really accented that design. And so this is just saying, again, take your design, be flexible, and be adaptive to change in your project, because it may actually turn out better as you're going through. So I got a couple more slides here. One thing I just want to thing is woodworking is so many different things. And I have learned and I embraced outsourcing. So creative woodworking, I've mentioned this a lot on our Facebook page for Guild of Oregon Woodworkers, but they do resawing, they do planing, they can do table joining, they can do sanding, they can do so many different things. A 50-inch planer. So Mike down there, he's the owner, and I was talking to him one day, and I said, "Wow, that how much does that planer run you? About 30 or 40,000?" He laughed and he goes, "That's a $150,000 planer," and they have two of them. So you can rent that $150,000 planer for $60 on 30 minutes, or $120 for an hour. And I use it all the time. And I'll tell you, it is a wonderful thing. Design craft door. When I did my kitchen, I had 40 cabinets, I told you. I farmed out all of my drawers and doors to DC Door. They're called Design Craft. Their website is like DC Door out of Damascus. They can almost build a door for cheaper than I can buy the material, because they do it in such high volume. But the other cool thing is you can take your wood to them. If you want it done out of zebra wood, where they don't normally carry that, you can take your wood to them and they'll make any door or drawer you want. So if you don't want to hassle with, $200 in bits and all the labor that goes into making a door or drawer, take it to DC Door. Hardwood Industries and Crosscut both have pre-finished drawer parts where you can get 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch, and it comes with a prefabricated slide cut for your bottom, and it's pre-finished. So all you have to do is just staple them together. I know it's not a nice dovetail and all that, but if you want to just crank out some drawers, it's a great way to do that. And spray finishing. My shop is dusty, and I ended up just outsourcing that. I found a sprayer locally, and I went down to Sherwin-Williams and said, "Hey, give me some names of people in this area that have a paint booth." And they gave me like 3 or 4 names. I called them and talked to them, and I found one that I was able to do. And I outsource all my spraying. I don't always spray. I only spray probably 1/8 of my projects. But when I do spray, I outsource it. Match your grain pattern. And when you get your wood in, spend 30 minutes with your wood. Lay it out, flip it over, turn it around. Look at your wood and match that grain pattern as much as you possibly can. It will make a difference. And this is my last slide, so we can get the Q&A. Joinery. This is something that, you know, I was watching a video on Project Farm. It's this guy that does these reviews, and he does the best of whatever, and he does a lot of different things. And one of the things he did one time was wood glue. And I'm watching the video because I really like him. He tests a lot of stuff, you know, best blades, best motor oil, best whatever, and wood glue. He takes 2 pieces of wood and glues them together butt end. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? Why are you gluing these together butt end? That's not a good test. You know how many pounds that butt end could withstand? Titebond 2 went over 4,000 pounds of pressure before it snapped. I was amazed. I was like, 4,000 pounds of weight was applied. So he butt end 2 ends, and he applied weight to the bottom, and he had a chain hoist that he could measure the weight on. Went over 4,000 pounds before that thing finally separated. It just shows you that the current glue that we have today is really, really strong. All joinery options are better than no joint. It just gives you more glue surface. And I really have a hard time recommending one over the other. Although I do want to point out this one wedge tenon. It's called a wedge through tenon. This was another one of these projects where I saw this and I was really enthralled. I was like, ooh, this is a really cool joint. There's no glue, and there's a little bit of gimme. So you don't have to make the joint perfect. You can have a little bit of wiggle room. The only thing that's absolutely perfect on a wedge through tenon is the shoulder. The shoulder that has to be flat, because when you put that wedge in there and you pound it with your mallet, it just tightens the entire thing up, and it's super tight. And I was really excited about that, and I've used it on several different projects. But again, it was something that I tried. It was something new. I'd never done a wedge through tenon before, and I said, what is that? It looks like a cool joint. And once I did it, I was like, that was really strong, and there's not an ounce of glue in that joint. And it's great for breakdowns. If you want to take something and be able to break it down later, and you don't want a bunch of bolts and screws and different things, wedge through tenon is a wonderful way. So that's it. That's today's part 1. I know I went through a lot, and I went through it really fast, but I really wanted to get the question and answer. And I'll stay here as long as we have Q&A.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Thurman. Can you take the share screen off, though?
I can do that.
Point? And then if we necessary, we can bring it back up. And at this point, I'm not seeing any questions at all on the chat. So does that mean that nobody has any questions, or you'd rather do it a different way?
I think we're still digesting.
I was going to say, if you can maybe, let's just do this openly. I think at this point, and if you have a question or suggestion or whatever, just go ahead and unmute yourself. And I can't see everybody, but let's just give it a try and be informal. And if you have something to say, just sort of introduce yourself and ask your question. So nobody has any questions at this point.
While you're thinking of your questions, because I know someone wants to ask a question, I was just going to say that I have 2 presentations that we're posting. This is what's called a speaker presentation that has kind of limited amount of information on each slide. And because it was meant more for me to talk, and I didn't want you to read a bunch of things, but I do have a presentation that you'll be getting a link to that has a lot a lot of the things that I spoke to and a lot of the links that you'll be getting that. So you don't have to have notes and different things for those. So there will be a presentation available that has got more words on each page to remind you of what I was talking about on each one of the pages. Welcome, everybody. So first thing, I did a dry run of this, and I was really hoping to get this done like 45 minutes, where we could do 15-minute Q&A, but my dry run was around an hour. So this is going to go to about an hour, but I'll stay as long as it takes to answer any questions at the end, and we'll see how this goes. So there's a lot of tips in here. As I started going through it and refining it, there's a lot of hopefully good things that will be happening. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the type of wood you use, and hopefully people here have started to explore and see different types of different wood. But we have great companies here in Portland that can give you really good wood that's much, much better than the Home Depot and the Lowe's stuff. The thin plywoods that you get at Home Depot and Lowe's, I don't know how many you've had this, but you can easily sand through the veneer. I've had voids where I went to go handle the plywood, and my finger pushed through the veneer because there was a void behind the veneer and they didn't even have it filled. So that can be very frustrating. And really you want to get to the better type of wood, which is we're going to talk about in the next page. I also wanted to point out too, you're probably familiar with Hardwood Industries. It's the first step one. They're down in Tualatin. They're a fabulous place to get to know. They've got their prices are probably the best prices in the Portland area just because of the volume they do. Crosscut is over on First North Avenue. It's right off of 405 and Highway 30. Gobi is a little bit down Highway 30. It's and they're more slabs and not as much dimensioned lumber, where Crosscut has a lot of dimensioned lumber. Sustainable is a new place that we had a meeting at a couple years ago that the guild was over there, and I have bought so much lumber from them. They're really specialize in Oregon lumber. So you get a lot of madrone, you get a lot of juniper, other white oak, and different things that we have. I'm also putting down two...
Thurman, let me interrupt just for a second. For those of you that were there, we had a great presentation last night, actually, by Lynn from Sustainable to our program meeting on Zoom. So many folks, I think, are maybe familiar with Sustainable Northwest Wood just from that presentation last night.
And I would really recommend using these guys. I also threw in a couple of the sawyers that I work with. These are individuals. They're not companies, so they don't have a bunch of people. And you'll have to make appointments to go out there and look at their things. But they both have websites, and they're both really good people that I've used. And I would really encourage you to go out and check out a sawyer and check out the wood that they've got. The prices that you're going to get at the sawyers are so much cheaper than anything else. So if you can find what you're looking for, and sometimes you'll find it and sometimes you won't, but it's really good. So let's talk about the very first time I remember going to Hardwood Industries. And they were talking a language that I had no idea what it was. 4/4, 6/4, 8/4. And my eyes kind of glazed over, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I had never used these terms. And so I remember that. And I want to just, for those of you who know that, apologize, but I do want to just get some people, if you're not familiar with what these are. So it's really just an inch. 4/4 is an inch, 8/4 is 2 inches, and 12/4 is 3 inches. So it's the full wood. When you buy wood at Home Depot, or it's usually in 3/4, they'll call it a 1x6, but it's really 3/4 by 5.5. And when you buy lumber from these places, you're typically getting it in these dimensions. And so they'll have, 4/4, 5/4, 6/4, and it really gives you a lot of wiggle room. When you're going to join things and you're doing tables, There's nothing like starting off at 6/4 and gluing up your panels and then putting it through a planer and getting it down to an inch. I mean, the wood's a lot more stable. At 3/4 of an inch, you're going to have a tough time. Wood's going to want a cup. It's going to want a bow after you do glue ups. The thicker the wood you go, you're going to have a much better wood. So really, when you hear of people talking 6/4 wood, it's just really 1.5 inch and thick. And it comes in a variety of lengths. Sometimes you'll get it with an edge. You can ask for a clean edge on one side so you can have at least one straight edge. And that costs money. Everything that you get, you could have 2 straight edges. But I like to get no straight edges and choose where my edge begins. That's the best for me. I have a 8-foot long track saw, and so I just get my track saw up and I rip my edge, and then I put it on my table saw and I get it to the width that I want. But that's something to think about. The different types of plywood that are out there is immense. I mean, they have A grade, B grade. You want A grade on both sides. You want B grade on both sides, or A on one and B on the other. So you could have shop quality plywood, and the different types of core that they come with really vary. The composites are more stable. They're flatter, but they're not as good as screw holding. So the screw holding for me, I like the solid, either the combo core or the veneer. But the absolute top one that I put the arrow is Baltic birch. Baltic birch. If you're not using Baltic birch, you've got to go get Baltic birch. I say it's a weird wood. It is the best wood for doing drawers, bar none. I do it for all of my jigs. I do it for anything that any jig, any drawer. I'm looking at some stuff on my wall behind my computer where I did some French cleats, all done in Baltic birch. It's the most stablest, strong wood you can get, and it comes in 5x5 sheets, and that's why I say it's a weird. It's a European, and they do come in. You can get them in 8x4, but the typical is 5x5, and it's a very odd size for most people if you're used to a 4x8 sheet of plywood. So, you can ask for 1/2 inch. They'll get you it's a millimeters, but it's 1/2 inch more or less. But I really recommend Baltic birch if you haven't used it. So get away from the Lowe's and Home Depot and start using some of these other really good plywoods. And both Crosscut and Hardwood Industries have plywood in a wide variety of different types of wood. You can get walnut, you can get sapele, you can get cherry, you can get almost anything in these plywoods from both of these companies. So you don't have to always go with solid wood, and plywood's a good choice in a lot of cases. So
Thurman, can I stop you for a second? There's a question about plywood. Mark says, I find marine plywood to be as good or better than Baltic birch. Can you comment?
Marine plywood is a really good wood for exterior use, and I think there's no other use if you're going to do something like exterior. You want to use marine plywood, but I think it's heavy, and it doesn't come in 1/2 inch. I think I've only seen marine plywood in 3/4, so I could be wrong because I've used marine plywood, but I've only used it in 3/4. So the Baltic birch is, for me, a 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch, because you can get Baltic birch and 1/4 inch too for your drawer bottoms. I don't know if marine plywood comes in a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. So yes, marine plywood does have waterproof glue. You're absolutely right. And that's why it's exceptional for exterior use.
At Mr. Plywood, at least you can get marine plywood at least 1/4, 1/2, and I think 3/4, maybe even a whole inch.
Okay.
But it's like $140 a 4x8.
Yeah, it's.
Thurman, can I just interject? I should have mentioned this again. Please, everyone, if you would mute during the presentation, and if you do have questions or comments, use the chat at this point. Otherwise, we're going to get very delayed in the presentation. Thank you.
So I would just say if you've used Baltic birch and it's your choice, but for me, the strength it has over a length is really, really good. I think for the 1/2 inch, normally you have to go to 3/4 inch to get that. And I like Baltic birch because it gives me that really sturdy build ability at a much lighter weight. So
great. Thanks. Thanks
check
a lot,
it out.
Norman.
When I started this presentation, I had sticker your wood every night on every page. And I think I cleaned up most of it, but you're going to see that here. And I think when you get to working with wood, as soon as you start planing it and sanding it, you open up the pores and you start getting all of this moisture from the surrounding air. And if you lay that wood flat on your workbench, the moisture is going to come on the top and it's not going to get on the bottom and it's going to bow. And you're going to have a lot of issues. And you can reduce so many issues if you just sticker your wood every night. I like using 2x4s ripped in half. It's like 1.5 by 1.5 stickers. And it's a great size because my clamps fit underneath it as well. So it works really well.
Thurman, this question comes from me. Sticker your wood? Don't know what that means.
So sticker your wood is if you look at the picture, you take 2 pieces of wood. Thank you for clarifying, because for me it's I guess I do it so every time. You have the 2 pieces of wood that you put down in between each of your wood. So if you look at this picture and you see these boards, these are stickers. So they call this stickering, and the term comes from sawyers, because when they mill the slabs, they have to have airflow on all 4 sides of the slabs. And so when you go to a sawyer, you'll see these huge stacks of wood, 8-10 feet tall, and there'll be these little slats of wood in between each of the layers to give it airflow around it. And it's called stickering. You can use anything up to, you could use 3/4 inch thick stickers. I like using 1.5 just because it fits my my phone is ringing. It fits my clamps really well. So, but stickering is, you'll see it in this picture where it's boards in between each board to give it airflow and air movement. And it has to be even on the bottom one, because if you lay it flat, there we go. Sorry. If you lay it flat on your workbench, you're going to get that moisture from the air that will attach to the top, and you won't get to the bottom. And this is something that really starts pronouncing itself once you start planing and joining your wood, is because you've now taken those wood fibers and you've ruffled them up. And when wood fibers are ruffled up, they're going to start taking in more moisture from the air than they would have previously. And that's why people say, wait, why did it bow on me? And it is just incredible. I had a friend of mine that had a warped door for a cabinet that he had laid down, and he brought it over and he says, can you fix this? And I just put it up on a shelf I have these open shelving that are basically all stickers. And I said, let's just let it sit there for a week or 2 and then we'll see how it looks. And after about 2 weeks, he came by and I just gave him his door back and it was perfectly flat again. So there's a trick you can do if you do get bowed boards. If you notice I'm going to use my hands here in the picture, but if it cups like this, what that means is the moisture got on the outside, the concave side, and the interior where it's bowed towards didn't get as much moisture. And so what you can do, and this is something that's been passed down for ages, is you can take your board out in your lawn in the morning when there's dew on it, put the bowed side down on the grass. So flip it down so it's like this on the grass. So it's curved like this. And the sun will heat the top, which will take moisture off, and the bottom will absorb moisture from the bottom, and it will sometimes straighten out your board. So you can avoid that if you sticker your wood every night. So templating. This is something that I got turned on to when I had granite countertops installed in my house. And these guys come out with these strips of wood and a glue gun. And they lay the strips of wood around the edge of where the countertop's going to go, and they use the glue gun to glue this frame together, which you kind of see over on the right-hand side. And it is exact. So it matches the angle, the the whole flow around the walls, because no wall is straight. And I looked at that and I was like, you know what? I'm going to use that. I use that a lot. So what I did is I took 2x4s and I ripped them on the side, you can see here, and I just have a whole stack of these. And anytime I'm trying to do something, I just pull them out and I make a template. This is an example where I had a slab and I was trying to fit it onto a certain size for a end table. And the client didn't want a amorphous shape. She wanted it more square, but I was going to round off the edges and renaturalize it when I was done. But the template helped me visualize what would be the best place to cut that slab to get that square out of it. And it's a really good technique, just a hot glue gun and some thin strips of wood that you can cut your own on your own table saw. So this is called templating. And this is it's imperative if you're fitting something inside your house, because your house rarely has square walls. And this also can act as a storyboard for you, because it tells you exactly what your space you're going to fit. So you're not trying to jam that tape measure in a space and, you know, okay, it's 32 and a half. Well, it's 32 and 5/8, but, you know, in this corner, but it's 32 and 3/8 in this corner. So using a template will really help you do that. Winding sticks. So I carry a pair of winding sticks when I go slab shopping. And it's because when I'm looking at a 10-foot long slab that's 5 feet wide, it's really difficult to get an idea of how warped is this board, because they typically come, like a slab will typically come in 12/4, which is 3 inches thick. And I can lose an inch. That's fine. I can take it down to 2, which is normally what I do. But winding sticks really help me visualize how bad is this slab and how much wood am I going to lose when I take it over to get it planed and flattened. But for the general woodworker, this is what you really should be using to look at your boards before you plane them, because you really want to joint. So the joiner, people, it's kind of interesting. Jointing came along. We think of it as taking 2 boards and putting an edge together, which is one use of a joint. But really, face joining to get one flat flat sides is the first thing you should do before you run it through your planer. And when you use winding sticks, it shows you exactly how bad your board is warped. And winding sticks are 2 boards that you put a distance apart on your board and you eyeball it down there, and it's amazing. You'll see the difference, because it will not be, I'm trying to use my camera here, but you will see this gap, and you'll see how much of a gap you have when you look down this board, because now you have 2 straight boards that you're referencing, and it really helps you do that. So if you haven't used winding sticks, I would really recommend that you use those to find where your flaws are at before you plane, because all plane does is it thicknesses. It doesn't straighten your lumber. It just takes it to a consistent thickness. It won't fix any warpage or anything else. You have to use a jointer. Now, you can use a jointer hand plane, which is what I started off with. I started off with a number 5 scrub plane, and a number 5 scrub plane is absolutely wonderful for getting a flat board. You don't have to get the whole board flat. All you have to do is get the board so it lays flat. So when you're jointing a board with a hand planer, you just want to just get it so it lays flat, because when you put it through your thickness planer, you put that flat side on my planer, my blades are on top, so I would put my flat side on the bottom, and when it planes through, it'll use that bottom as a reference as it pushes down on the wood, and it'll straighten off the top, and then I can flip it over and do the other side and get them both smooth. But this is something that a lot of people haven't used, and it was an epiphany for me when I started using winding sticks, because it saved me a lot of hassle. I can't tell you how many times I thought that planer was going to flatten that board, and it didn't. And the board goes in warped, and it's going to be thinner, but it's still going to be warped. So winding sticks are really, really good to see that warpage that you have. And, it's not a bad idea to take them when you go shopping. A lot of people, they'll, you lay out that board and you look down the edge, and that's pretty good. But if you really want to see a board, you can use winding sticks. And it's also really good if you need to cut a board. A lot of times I get boards in 10-foot lengths and I don't need a 10-foot length. And you go to use the winding sticks and you can see, oh, this is where it really turns. You can move the winding stick further and further down the board and you see where it turns, and that's where you cut it. And then if you cut it there, then you don't have to flatten the whole 10-foot long board. You just got to cut it. You just got to flatten it for the shorter pieces that you're using in your project. So that's winding sticks. Epoxy. I know river tables and stuff are the cat's meow right now, but I like to use epoxy and cracks and voids, and it's something that you can do a lot with. I usually go one of two ways. I either use a clear epoxy or I color it. And depending upon the type of wood, like I just did some madrone hall tables, and I did a kind of a reddish brown black dye that I used on my epoxy, and then I put it in all the cracks, and it just blended almost perfectly with the reddish heartwood of the madrone. And so it just really accented it and did it. Sometimes I'll do clear. Sometimes, like the one I'm showing here has colored stones in the bottom, and colored stones is crystal calcite, which is planeable. It has a hardness of like salt, so it's almost like salt, and you can run planers over it. And it's not going to hurt the edges. Where if you used a real rock and you run a planer or your router bit over it, it'll chip out your bit. So use crystal calcite, and then you can use dyes and different things to color it. And then that way, when you take it into creative woodworking, or you plane it on a router sled, or do something like that, it'll plane right through it. You won't have an issue. So it's kind of fun if you haven't used epoxy to fill cracks and voids to do that. But it's a lot much better than using wood glue. And here's that same table that I was using the template on earlier, and what it looked like after my epoxy pour, and then what it looks like after I French polished it and got it back from Creative Woodworking. But Creative Woodworking is a 50-inch wide planer, and you can send that puppy right through it, and it'll come out beautiful. So you don't really need to worry about when you're pouring epoxy, it has to be perfect. Let it go all over the place, and you can sand it. It'll sand right through it, or take it into creative. So one of the two ways. Epoxy does not do well. I'm going to clarify that. Creative, their 50-inch wide planer sander is a very special tool. When I tried to plane epoxy through my 20-inch planer, it chips a lot. So usually I'll sometimes use the planer to get it down a little bit, but then I'll use my belt sander to get it to fine a little bit, so I don't have a lot of chips. So it is brittle. So again, I don't know how common this is to a lot of people, but again, when you dimension lumber, going back to the very first page where I said, second page where I said use 4/4 or 6/4, wood to start off with is you want to do any epoxy work or jointing of wood before you dimension it with a planer. So you can get the edges good with a jointer to join the two pieces of wood, but leave that wood at its thickest as you can possibly do before you join your tabletops together. This way you have a lot more room for error, and you're not trying to get perfect. If you start off with, if you plane your wood to 3/4 and then you join them together into a tabletop, and that wood has even the slightest little bow or cup on them, and then now you're like, now your wood's going to be down to 5/8 or 1/2 inch by the time you get it through the planer. So there's kind of a recipe, and I've used this recipe, and so I thought I would just, to me, it feels like this isn't really new for some people, so apologies if you already know how to do this. But I like to sticker my wood for a couple of days when I get it into my shop, because my moisture in my shop is different from wherever I bought it at. I'll do my face jointing on it and rip one edge. So I like to get one edge straight and then edge joint that with a joiner, and then I rip it to width. So whatever width I need or I can get out of it, because usually once I have the straight edge, then I can kind of look at any kind of imperfections in the wood or you know, how straight is it, because you really don't know it's straight until you, like I told you, I usually get my wood without any straight edges, and so I get one edge straight, and then I look to see where the imperfections are at, and now I can see, oh, do I get 5.5 inches out of this board, or do I get 6 inches out of this board? It'll vary depending upon where my straight edge is at and how I do that. Once I've got it ripped to width, then I'll plane it to thickness. If I'm not joining it together. If I'm joining it together, I won't plane it to thickness. I might skip plane it just to get some of the, if it's got some, I get some gnarly wood sometimes, and so I'll skip plane it, which means you're just kind of putting it through your planer to light pass to get knocked down the real high points on it, or maybe some bumps, because if you're getting 4/4 or 6/4 wood, a lot of times that wood will have some bulges in it that you can take out. And then when you're all done, make sure you sticker your wood. So at the very last session, I said, I don't care about how big my boards are when I'm doing a face frame, for example. It might be 2 1/4, it might be 1 7/8. I don't know what it's going to be. At this point, this is where I know how wide my boards are going to be and how thick they're going to be. So this is when I really start looking at, okay, my design, and I now have my lumber dimensioned and flat, which is really important. And that's when I know I'll start taking the rest of my measurements off of that to create my project. This was going to be the very first slide of this whole presentation when I started it off, because one of the things I was thinking about is I started off, like I told you, in a second bedroom of an apartment complex with a circular saw and a router. And I was thinking, you know, you don't need all these big tools. What can you really accomplish with just basic things? And so, you know, you think of a table saw. Well, really, you know, with a straight edge and clamps and a circular saw, you've got what a table saw does, which is just it rips wood into a certain length, into a certain width. I'm sorry, not length, width. A better than just a regular circular saw is a track saw. So they have track saws that are in different sizes. Festool was the first one to come out with it many years ago. Now everybody has a track saw. So you can go out and get whatever track saw you want. You can make your own, which I think, I'll see, I can't remember if I put it in this. Let me see if I put it in this presentation. Hang on. I was going to say, I had some jigs that I did. Trying to think of, it's way down in the presentation, so we'll get there later. But, you know, a circular saw and track jointer, again, a number 7 joiner plane if you're doing an edge jointing, or number 5 for face jointing. So for scrub planes, as a number 5 is really great. Number 7 would be the long one. It's the 15 to 20 inch one, and I have one of those. I've used that. It works beautifully. The other thing that I saw, which was really cool, and this was just in the last year or so, I was watching some YouTube guy, and he had a build on how to make a jointer sled for a planer. And if you Google that or go into YouTube and just search for joiner sled, boy, that's an amazing, really cool adaptation where he created this. And it takes a bit of work. You're gonna put a few hours into building this thing, but he ended up with a device that's kind of a sled that you put your wood on top of before you send it to your planer, and it'll joint your wood like a joiner would. So it's a really cool idea. Planer, you may have heard of router gantries. It's where they take 2 parallel boards and you have a 90-degree frame that you build on top of that, and you run your router, and you can just run your router back and forth over the wood, and you can flatten any board. That's just a router and a router gantry, and you can build those for really reasonable. I was just perusing Reddit before this meeting, and a guy came up with a really nice one using machine tools for like $200. It's a gorgeous router gantry that he created. So you don't need to go spend $1,000 on a 10-inch wide joiner. You can get it in other ways. Sander, obviously, I really like the random orbital sanders, and we'll get into that later. And then bandsaw, you can have a coping saw, electric jigsaw, creative woodworking. I've used them for resawing, so it's another way to do it. I guess the point is don't get hung up on it if you don't have the tool that you think you need. There's a lot of tools to do what you need, and you just need to think about it a little differently. And these are options that everyone should have. Okay, so we're going to get into gluing. I have about 6 pages here on gluing. This is probably, when you cut your wood and you dimension your wood and you're all ready to glue up, gluing is, to me, is probably where I look back at. I don't have as many mistakes now, but gluing just always creates issues. It's, time to glue. My things aren't gluing up the way I thought they would when I start applying my glue. And then the project just as a reference, we talked last meeting how the panels will move and you need to leave space in there. It's really a good idea to stain or dye your panels before you glue. And I prefer dyeing because dyeing doesn't have a finish in it and it's just going to color your wood. But for that little bit of wood that's going to go in and out of a space, you're going to see that as wood shrinks and expands over the course of the year and the moisture changes in your house. And you'll see that stain line if you don't stain it before you glue. So this is just an advice. If you've got wood movement that you're accounting for, do a dye before you do it. Always do a dry fit. This was a complicated build that I was doing, and you can see my clamps. This is just make sure, okay, when I go to glue this thing together, how am I going to glue it together, and will it glue together the way I think it's going to? And a dry fit basically is assembling everything without the glue and ensuring that everything is the way you want it. I even put my drawer slides in there and just, okay, yep, everything looks good. It's going to glue together. And then I kind of get a glue strategy for where am I going to start and where am I going to end, or am I going to maybe do a part of it, let the glue harden after 30 minutes, and then go do another one. The URL for the router gantry, I'll find that when we get done with this talk. But the one on Reddit I was looking at earlier, actually, you know what? I wonder if I had that open. Let me look on my other page here. Here, I have Reddit open on my other window. Hang on, I'm just going to go grab this because this was this is probably one of the better router gantries I think I've seen. And you'll get an idea for what it is. Let me see if I can find it. I was scrolling way too much in this. Oh, that's not it. Aha, there it is. Okay. I'm going to put this in the chat. Okay, there is that's a router gantry, and that's a really kick-butt router gantry, by the way, that I was looking at earlier. So back to gluing, just do a dry fit. Make sure it all works. It's worth the hassle. It's a lot harder because you're clamping everything, and it's going to move, but really it's going to save so much pain and some complicated glue ups. The second thing is if you haven't used clamping calls, I would really recommend trying to do that. I got a picture over here, and I like this picture and I don't like this picture, because the reason I like it is because it shows you the call is bowed, the reason that these cauls have less material on the ends than they do the center is that when you go to clamp down, your clamps are at the end, and to force that bow down, you're basically going to make it flat. And when this gets clamped down to your workpiece, as you see on the right when I was doing a garage door glue up, this is a way for me to get pressure in the middle of a board where I may not otherwise get it. So I was gluing up boards, and you can see I had some little bits of pieces of wood underneath there and the clamping cauls. And this is a way to get your clamps where you can't normally get a clamp. So if you're trying to glue something in the middle of a board or do something, I use them also when I'm doing table glue ups because it keeps all my boards flat. The reason I don't like this drawing on the left is because I think it's overcomplicated with these threaded rods and these little things to clamp it. I just put the cauls right on my clamps, and I let my clamps do all the work. So when I'm doing a glue up on a table, I'll have a caul on the bottom and a caul on the top. And then I sandwich it between those two, and I'll have like 6 or 8 of those cauls going down the length of the glue up on both sides. Clamping cauls are so easy to make. You just get some 1x material, whatever length. I have 3 different lengths. I have 18, 24, and 30 inches because you use different types of projects. And I'll just go, like just last year, I think I had needed the 18s, and so I went and made some 18s. The 24s just were a little too long on that project. So you just take a 1x strip, and you can, the easiest way I think is to use a hand planer and start in the middle. And as you come down, you're taking a heavy bite out of the end. So you start off in the middle with a hand plane and plane to the end, and you take about 4 or 5 swipes. And by just starting in the middle, you're really not taking a bite because you're kind of coming like an airplane, and you just barely kind of get into it. And as you further you go down the board, you put some more shoulder into it, and you take a bigger bite, and you do 4 or 5 passes on either side, and you'll have a nice bowed surface. You can also do this if you have a belt sander like I have in the back over here. You can take it up to that belt sander and kind of round that off the lengthwise. But you want this bowed board here to do this. And these are just invaluable. If you haven't used clamping cauls, once you've used them and you see how to do them, they're just one of those things that are awesome. The one tip you need to remember is to put paste wax on this curved surface because you're doing glue ups and you don't want to glue that board to whatever you're gluing up because you're going to have glue squeeze out whenever you're doing something. And so just put some paste wax on that curved surface, and then the glue won't stick and it'll come right off, and you'll be able to go. So that's really the only thing you need to remember on a caul. So
then we have sorry, thought you were done with calls. Okay. On the previous slide, quick question: can you mark out and install your slides before gluing?
That's a great question. And I install my slides and a lot of times and pre-drill them. So you can do that. It just depends on what kind of space you have. So if I've got space where I can get my drill in there, then I usually won't pre-drill them before I glue up. But if I'm working with if you're doing a nice set of drawers, let's say those shallow, 1.5 inch drawers that you won't be able to get in there, then yeah, absolutely. That's a really good idea to go ahead and get all of your pre-drills done and before you do your glue up, before you do it. Yeah, someone mentioned that clear packing tape works well. Anything that prevents glue from adhering to the wood on your cauls is a really good idea. And clear packing tape would work as well. That's a good idea. I've fallen in love with these little brushes, and I know that there's more glue tools out there at Rockler and Woodcraft than I think anything else. Everyone's always looking for a better glue, a way to adhere glue. I found these over at Harbor Freight. They're actually for plumbing, and they're called acid brushes, to do the solder on your joints before you do your copper pipes. But I found them just absolutely wonderful to do glues. And I've had this package for probably 10 years, and I still haven't made my way through it. Because what I do is I just have a cup of water, and if you dip your brush in the water before you do your gluing, the glue will come out a lot easier. Then I just throw the brush back in the cup of water when I'm done gluing, and the glue just comes right out of the brush. And so I might have to squeeze it a little bit later, but I love these little brushes. And it's like, I put the little thing, Harbor Freight Tools, $2.50, $2.50 for 50 of these things. And I don't throw them away. I just reuse them and reuse them. And the only time I throw them away is when I forget to put them back in the water and they get hard. But if I can put it back in the water within a day or two, I can usually salvage it. So it's great. The other thing is don't over clamp. You can clamp too hard and squeeze all the glue out of your joint. So it's not a strength test here. You want to make sure that it's well together and it's not moving, but you do not over clamp. Don't keep squeezing on that clamp until you can't go any further, because you can get glue squeezed out and you won't have enough glue in the joint. This is something that's really hard to do. Don't wipe. Let your glue dry. There's a perfect time about 30 minutes after you glue, where the glues, they say it's, you only need 30 minutes to dry. I don't, my shop's always perpetually cold. So mine takes longer, but 30 minutes is wonderful to take a scraper. And I just use, just a 2-inch wide putty knife is all I do. It's a dull putty knife. And I just go over that, and it just comes up like you wouldn't believe. It's just beautiful on how well that glue will just pop right off your wood with a putty knife. And so if you let it get harder, then you can just sand over it. With a sander, it just takes more effort. I think I like just doing it with a scraper, but don't wipe, because when you wipe, you're going to take that glue and it's going to go into your wood, and it's water-based, and it's going to suck into those grains, and your finish isn't going to adhere as well. And so you'll have splotchiness and you'll have issues if you do a wipe, because unless you have to sand a lot to get through that glue that gets spread out. So it's really a good idea not to wipe your glue. And if you sometimes, and I say that it's really hard, if it's in an odd space in a corner that I just can't get with a putty knife, I may wet down a paper towel with some water and try to clean it up a little bit, but I usually let it dry 30 minutes and then come back with and scrape it. Sanding thoughts. This again is one of those things that I've been using a random orbital sander for so long. I remember it was at a wood show, I don't know how long ago, and I bought one of those. It was a make your own 20 or 30 inch sander or whatever, however long you wanted to do it. And they had a kit, and I built that sander and went out and I spent like $200 on the motor and the pulleys and all the springs that came in the kit, and it sanded. But you know what? I used it like twice, and I was like, this thing takes way too long. I mean, the random orbital sanders just crank through and do a great job, and you don't get any sanding marks. So I guess I tried going to a belt sander, and I sold it and got rid of it. And I have a 4x24 belt sander that I use when I'm doing slabs. But 95% of the time I'm using my 5-inch orbital sander. And if you have an air compressor that can handle it, air is just wonderful. And the newer sanders now have the integrated dust collection on them. So it's really nice. The electric ones you're gonna feel it in your hands, and vibration wise, you get used to it after a while. The air ones are really nice because they're much less vibration and doing that. For sandpaper, I like using the hook and loop for two reasons. One is it's really easy and fast. I can just put it on. It's not as cheap as the adhesive backed ones, but I like the the second reason is because I love using those, my leftover pads that when they get to a point where they're not really picking up sand anymore, I put them in a box that I keep all my old used sandpaper, and I'll use that for doing all my edge sanding and when I do hand sanding. And that hook and loop paper with that little bit of felt on the back is really comfortable to be able to use as hand sanding. And so I've just gotten it, and I buy them in boxes of 50. So the price is about 40 cents a piece on that. But if you haven't used a random orbital sander, these are really the cat's meow when it comes to sanding. And when you sand, and this is the one thing as I said earlier on in the previous presentation that the woodworking part where you're cutting and shaping your wood is a quarter of the effort. Sanding is about a third of the effort for me whenever I do a project. It's because I start off at 100 and I go through the entire piece and I get everything sanded to 100, and then I do 120, I do 150, and I typically stop at 180. It depends on the finish that I'm doing. Some finishes will require you to go more. If you're using boiled linseed oil, for example, you want to pop the grain, you probably need to bring it down to 220 or 320. And some finishes, some of the oil-based finishes will ask for you to go to 220. But most of the finishes tell you to go to 180, and there's no reason to go further beyond that. And but don't skip a grit. Don't go from 100 to 150, because you're going to get swirl marks that you're going to miss. And if you go this route, it's very prescribed, but if you do it, you should not have any leftover sanding marks that you missed on the previous sand. So this is probably the one thing where I think most people skip out on, because they don't want to spend 4 or 5 hours sanding a project before they do the finishing. But you really need to spend that time to go through that. Now, the absolute best thing to use besides sandpaper, which I tried using, and it's an effort, is the scrapers, the metal scraper. It's about a 2-inch by 4-inch piece of metal that you put a burr on, and then you can just hand scrape and get a wonderful finish. And if you've got highly figured wood that you really want to pop that grain even more, you can use that instead of sandpaper. But it's an effort, and I'll be honest, I didn't get as good with it as I wish I could have. So that is another alternative for you. When you think you're done finishing, and I can't stress this enough, if this is one thing about sanding that I would say you absolutely have to do, is spend that extra half an hour, because it takes time to dry once you put it on, is to wet down some paper towels and wipe down your piece with mineral spirits, because any imperfections that are in that will pop out and you will see them. And if you do not do this, you're going to find out when you put that finish on, and you're going to be moaning, because when you see that imperfection when you put that finish on, that you're going to have to strip that finish off and resand it back down anyway. So rather than have to sand through finish and redo your piece, do it with mineral spirits, and those imperfections will come out, and you'll see where you need to do that more sanding at. So I buy this by the gallon. I go through probably 3 or 4 gallons a year, and because mineral spirits, it's used for diluting certain finishes, but I use it a lot for showing people what the wood. Because when a client comes over and I show them wood, it's a great way to say, hey, here's what's really going to look like with a clear finish. Because people will look at it and go, oh, that's okay, it's okay. But when you put mineral spirits and you wipe it down, that's what a clear finish is going to look like. So it really gives you an idea of what that's going to look like. You can use denatured alcohol instead of mineral spirits. It dries really fast though. So I like mineral spirits because when you use denatured alcohol, you go to wipe a 4-foot piece, it's going to be drying on the left side before you're done wetting it down on the right side. So, but you can use denatured alcohol. Yeah, that works great. Yes, I would let it dry for 30 minutes before you do any finishing on it. It depends on the finish that you're putting down. If you're using this is where mineral spirits and denatured alcohol could play a factor. If you're going to be doing a French polish or doing a shellac-based finish on your wood, then denatured alcohol, you would need to wait 30 minutes because it's how you dilute shellac anyway. So if you're doing an oil-based finish, most oil-based finishes use mineral spirits as a thing. So you don't need to wait the 30 minutes. But if you use a water-based finish, you absolutely have to wait 30 minutes to get that to evaporate so that you can do that. But this is the one sanding tip. You will see your imperfections to do it. So use mineral spirits or denatured alcohol. Some people, if you can, I only do it infrequently, so I wouldn't put this on the top of my list, but you can use water if you want to raise the grain. So if you have a certain type of wood like oak where you want to raise the grain and sand it one more time anyway, because you're going to dye something and you're using a dye-based water, which I use, then that will raise the grain and you'll have to sand it anyway, but you'll get to see where the imperfections are at with water. I don't use it nearly as much though to do that. One thing that I found really helpful is I have this light that's on a pedestal, and it has a top that has got it's a flexible head, and so I can adjust the angle of the light to any that I want. And I love putting this on the side of my piece after I've sanded and I wiped it down, and I look at that wood from an angle, and I can really see some imperfections that come out using oblique lighting. It's something that you could use if you have one of those little floodlights, that's got a clamp on the end, and you can kind of put it around your piece and different angles. Lighting will highlight certain things that you may not see when you're looking down straight on it with lighting. So this is something else, if you really want to be extra careful, oblique lighting is really helpful. This is something that I'm sure, I know I started off this way, is I always used to get those 1/8 inch or 1/4 inch round over bits. And then I would, use my router to round over the edges. And invariably I would always muck something up, and it didn't really look that good. And what I've really found is that I don't need to do that round over. I mean, I just like taking my leftover sandpaper and I go over those edges, and it does a couple of things. Wood always has those little fibers and little splinters that are coming out, and you may not catch it right away, but if you sand over your edges, it'll eliminate most of those issues where you have tear out. So if you've ever had a time when you got a piece of wood, you're really careful with it, and you're going to route it, or you're moving it someplace and it catches on a clothing and it rips out a chunk of the edge, and it's because you had that little tiny protrusion that you didn't even see, and you hand sand those edges, and it will virtually eliminate that problem. So I like to hand sand it because when I'm finishing it, I don't want to get splinters in my hand, and I hand sand everything, even if it's a non-show area on the corners. And you can sand this to your heart's content. You want to make it a little bit more of a round over, you just put a little bit more elbow grease into it. You can do whatever you want. And I think that hand sanding your corners on all your pieces is the way to go. I don't use routers anymore. I don't use any kind of electric sander on edges. I'll say, unless I'm doing a slab that I want a certain look on. I have a certain pattern that I can use with my random orbital, but most of them I hand sand with my leftover hook and loop that I've used, and it's really, really good. I want to put this in here one more time to say, sticker your wood when you're done sanding, because when you're done sanding, that's the time when your wood is just really going to be moisture absorbent. It's going to be wanting to take, you've taken all those wood fibers and you've just rustled them all up, and they are ready to and willing to accept moisture. And if there's one time I would say you really should be stickering your wood is when you're done sanding. One of the things that I built many years ago, and I included the SketchUp here. I actually uploaded my model into SketchUp, so you could go. SketchUp has a modeling warehouse that people can share their projects with, and you can download lots of drawings. And I uploaded my downdraft sanding table, but this was super cheap for me to build. It's all done with MDF around the edges, and then I did the drawers. I just shop wood. And inside of here, I went to a HVAC installer that works on, just they're all over the place. So you just find one and call them up and say, hey, you got a scroll cage blower. And used one that I can buy off you. And this was several years ago, so they're probably a little bit more expensive now. But for $75, I turned that entire table into a downdraft sanding table with a couple of furnace filters that I just blow out every once in a while with my air compressor. So I don't even buy new furnace filters. I just reuse it. This has been a godsend in my shop because I sand a lot, and you need a way to get rid of that sanding. This is just something to think about. You can buy commercially available things that will take the sawdust out of your air, and those aren't bad. But this is just an option if you want to look into a downdraft. I like it because this is my assembly table. It's covered with paste wax, so this is where I do all my dry fits. That's where I do all my glue ups. It's where I do all my sanding. It's the everything table to do that. So just something to consider. I wanted to talk about finishing. These books have been out for probably 15 or 20 years. And I cannot think of two better references for finishes than these two books. Bob Flexner over on the left, Understanding Wood Finishing, and Jeff Jewett on finishing. And they have additional books as well. But if you really want to understand finishing and the different types of finishes, how to use toner, when you do a finish and you're trying to color match, and do you want to put the color on the wood, or you want to put the color into the finish, which is a toner. You want to know how to repair a finish. I learned how to use wax and how to fix that when reading these books. They're pretty dense. They're not easy reading. There are a lot of chapters in them. They cover a lot of material. But for somebody who, if you really want to understand what really happens, the chemical processes, the different ways you can finish, how to clean brushes, how to spray finish. Jeff's got a book on spray finishing. He has a couple chapters in here, but he'll go through a lot of different things in there. And I really found these invaluable. So I would really recommend doing that. Somebody made a comment: does paste wax coated contaminate your work by having small amounts of wax? Not once it's hardened. Paste wax, if you haven't, you should be putting it on your table saw and your joiner, your planer as well. All of my tools have paste wax. If you put paste wax down and you let it dry for 15 or 20 minutes and buff it, it's not gonna release and come off to anything else. It's a very hard protective surface. They actually use paste wax, and you can put it on finished woodworking and use it as a protectorant. But it won't get on your wood as long as it's not fresh. If it's been 30 minutes or 45 minutes and you buffed it, then you shouldn't have any issue with paste wax. That was in chat. So these and paste wax is it's I'll talk about paste wax later because I love paste wax. It's like the duct tape of shop tools for me. But these two books on finishing, if I were to recommend two books, I would really recommend these two books, and they're wonderful references. And Jeff's got a website where he sells dye, which I'll be mentioning later, because his dye is the best dye I've ever used, and I can't recommend anything better than what he has. He's got a great website. It's got articles on it, on French polishing, on how to do different things. So he shares a lot of information as well on his website. Several years ago, I tried new finishes all the time, and I had a bulletproof finish that would take 3 weeks from start to finish, and it was too long. And so I had a restaurant that I frequented, and I knew the two sisters that owned it and ran it. And I volunteered. I said, hey, can I put I'll build you 10 tables for free, but they're all going to have a different finish on them. And I want to put them in your restaurant, and I want to watch them over the course of a year. And I want to see how they hold up, because nothing gets more dings and more cleanings than a restaurant. And I went through and I built them 10 tables of varying, that some of you can see in the background. Some of them are 4x2 and some of them are 2x2s. And I put different finishes on them, and I went through and I wanted to see how they held up, because while I had my bulletproof finish, which is the Balin Rock Hard, which is no longer Balin, by the way, they Mohawk purchased Balin. And so Mohawk it's got a table called Rock Hard table finish that is absolutely, you can't do better than on a table finish. But it's an investment in time. You're gonna be into it for 3 weeks from finishing to rubbing it out. And so I wanted to test a bunch of other things. And all I'm really trying to say is that, finishes, test your finishes, see how they work. Try different ones. There's a lot of different finishes out there, and I'm still trying new ones. I just ordered some new stuff this last week, and I'm going to try some new finishes. Finish application thoughts: brush, wipe on, French polish, and HVLP are the things that I've used. I love French polish. It's probably my favorite type of finish, because you can start and stop in 30-minute chunks. You can be done in 2 hours. I could do a project and get an entire tabletop done in 2 hours if I just sit at it and put the tunes on. I don't have to wait, 24-hour dry time between coats, sanding between coats, all of that. French polish is, for me, the most relaxing and easiest finish out there. The thing is it's not that durable. It's good durability. It's a shellac-based finish. It doesn't handle heat very well. And but if it does scratch, you can repair shellac in like 5 minutes. You just bleed right over it. HVLP. This is my HVLP sprayer. It's a great little sprayer. I do like the turbine being separate from an air compressor. I think it gives you a much better airflow. These are. I'd say I could probably talk for 20 minutes on HVLP. I would say it's a good thing to look into if you're doing high volume cabinets and stuff where it would take you a long time to brush or wipe something on. But otherwise, I would try to stick with the wipe-ons and the French polish over the spraying, unless you're doing high volume and you're doing very difficult areas to reach. So again, my favorite finishes. French polishing, water-based spar varathane, and armor seal are great finishes. This water-based spar varathane, I've used it in interior pieces as well. It's a water-based finish. No color change at all. It's just, if you don't want to change, where all the other finishes will give you some sort of color or something else. Water-based finishes typically don't give you that, which is sometimes good. You don't want that, and sometimes you do want more rich tone to your wood, so it just depends on what look you're going for. And this is where I said I'm trying something new here as well. Shop tips: periodically improve your workflow. I'm on what I affectionately call version 3.31, and that is just looking at how you work. Everybody works differently. You have different types of projects that you do. I bought a planer from a guy up in Battleground, Washington one year, and he did nothing but grandfather clocks. And he had a table saw and a 20-inch joiner and bandsaws all jammed into like a 15 by 15 workspace. I mean, it was tight. But you know what? It was perfect for him. His workflow, he did grandfather clocks, and that worked for him. And what I'm trying to say here is that when you go to design a shop, I wouldn't fuss too much over your whole design. My shop's been through some radical changes. I took pictures. Here's what it looked like after I first built it and got my first benches in, and you can see what it looks like now. New benches, new metal benches, all the walls are painted white. You're going to change, and you don't know what you're going to need until you work in your shop and you do a lot of projects. That's the bottom line, is you'll find out what you need and what you want to change. And what I say is change it frequently. Do the things that are bugging you. Don't let them sit. Go fix it and go make it better to do. The things that I have found personally to be the absolute best, lighting is everything. A lot of LED lights. I used to have the metal halide light, which gave the best natural light. But now with LED, you can get it in nice bright lights, almost like sunlight. If you paint your walls white, you're going to get more light, and you're going to like it. It's going to be a lot better. Rolling carts, you saw in that picture that I have in my back of my shop. I've got all these rolling carts that I use to move wood from one station to another. Really, really good. An old, comfortable office chair to sit while you ponder. It is nice. Let me tell you, you can get them for $5, $10 at garage sales. Get 2 of them. That way, when a friend comes over, they can sit down with you, and you can have good times. I took an old stereo of mine that I'd had since college, and I mounted the speakers on the rafters pointing down, and I have my stereo above my bathroom, so I can it's jammed back in, so you can only see the faceplate. I love music. I love working with music when I'm doing it. So if you like listening to anything, having a nice stereo in your shop is really conducive to mentally being there and getting into a pattern. If I were to say one tool that really is used more than anything else is my miter saw station, and having that 8 feet before it and 8 feet after it and a nice flat space, if you have that space, is really, really good. I do more cutting to length than anything else. That tool is used more than anything else. The dedicated assembly table we've already talked about. The one other thing that I can't believe it took me this many years to do it, but I built another building on the back side of my shop, primarily to get rid of all of my camping gear, because my shop was like this mixture of woodworking and storage. And it finally got to a point where I had to build another 16 by 20 building to move all my camping gear and everything else out of it. And when I did that, I moved my dust collector and my air compressor out. And that was the best thing I ever did. And another friend of mine, he had a really cool idea. He didn't build another building. He just took a lean-to. He built this little shed that's like 3 feet by 3 feet by square. And he just put his air compressor in there and put a little angled roof over the top of it. And it's got one side open to the elements. And he has his air compressor. That's how he moved his air compressor out of the shop, because that thing rattles. It is noisy. And when it's going, boy, you can't think, and it really can get on your nerves. And so if you can move that out of your shop, it'd be a really good idea. These are my absolute top tips. This is the jig that I mentioned earlier for a circular saw and a router. You can use them for routers. These are awesome. You don't need a straight edge. You don't need a track saw. You just need a piece of wood, and you glue that piece of wood to your plywood, and you run your saw. And guess what? That tells you exactly where that saw is going to cut every single time. So there's your track saw. You just made a track saw for $10. I still have one of these hanging on my wall, and I use it every once in a while with my circular saw. So it also works for router bits, but it is bit dependent. So you would need a separate one for each diameter bit. So you had a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. You would need different one of these. But hey, they're not that expensive to build, and it's really nice because you see this edge. You put that edge on a line that you want to cut, and that's where you're going to cut. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to measure how far off from the edge of my router to my bit is it going to cut. Oh, it's 3 3/16. No, you don't have to worry about that. Just put it on a board, rip it down here, and you know exactly how far that cut's going to be. Care and feeding of your tools. I mentioned this earlier, paste wax. I have paste wax on all my tools. Wood slides right over it, and it is so nice. And it keeps water from getting in, so it will, if you're sweating and sweat drips down on your table saw, you're going to get rust. If you have paste wax, you won't, because the water will hit the paste wax and you have to refresh it every once in a while, but I use that. One of the things I also love is that rather than search for a tool, a wrench or a hex wrench that's going to fit a certain tool, I go down to the resale shop and buy them for $1, and I put them on a magnet right next to my tool. I leave the rest of my hex set where my hex set is at, and my wrenches. I have dedicated wrenches for my HVLP sprayer, because I don't want to go look for the 3 wrenches that I need to disassemble my HVLP. And so I just bought them for $1. So you can get them at the resale shop, and it really helps out. Power cords, they'll get frayed. They're gonna tear. Just replace them. $10. You put a brand new cord on any tool. You can get a longer one if you want a longer one, or a shorter one. It doesn't take much to put a new power cord on a tool. I love Craigslist. If you come over to my shop and you see all my tools, I think 80% of my tools have been bought off of Craigslist. So you can get twice the tool for half the price if you buy it used, and you'll get to know your tool. You'll get to understand it. These things, buying new doesn't really, all it does is it gives you someone you can call when something goes wrong. It's a lot better to know your tool, because you're gonna have to fix it yourself. I mean, they're not gonna fix it. What they'll do is they'll try to walk you through something on the phone, or they'll give you a new part over the mail. But I like buying used, old equipment and getting it working, and I know it, and they're bulletproof, man. These things, very few things go wrong with them. I did put on here this dial indicator. This is the one thing that when you're shopping used, if you haven't used one of these, I would get one of these to go shopping, because if someone's abused their tool and they've bent a trunnion on the table saw because they've done something with it they shouldn't have been doing. And trust me, I've taken dial indicator out to a nice table saw I was looking at, and I ran it through, and that thing was a couple thousandths out. I mean, you can't have that. I mean, your blade's going to wobble. It's not healthy for your table saw. So if you have a dial indicator, you can pop the cover and push that down on the axe. The trunnion is what holds the blade that spins, and so you can manually spin it with that dial indicator on it, and as it does a full rotation, that dial indicator shouldn't move. And so that's what I'm really trying to say, is you can test this, because they have magnetic bases on them, and so they clamp to just about anything on any tool that you look at, and you can measure the how much out any kind of your axes or your bolts on not your bolts, it's trunnions. The other thing is 3-phase. I had never done 3-phase until about 6 or 7 years ago, when I picked up a used sawdust collector. It was a $5,000 unit I got for $1,500, and all I had to do was spend about $200 on a phase converter. I show here not $100. It's all geared on horsepower, but you feed 240 into this phase converter, and you get 3-phase. So you can run some of the nice 3-phase tools for the price of a small phase converter. Something to think about. Must-have tools. We're down to about 4 pages left on this thing. This is the one page on all my things that I only have one tool on. And this is because I think this is for a person working by themselves in a shop. This is the absolute best thing I ever have, which is these old wooden screw vices. They're not just for clamping. They can hold things vertically. They can clamp and give you a stop. I use them for my miter station stops. I'll just clamp it over there, clamp it down, and I've got a stop. And drill press, you can have a drill press clamp, but you can use these, and you can also use them for clamps. So if you haven't gotten a couple of these old wood screw clamps, I'd say, man, I've found these things to be invaluable for giving me that third hand, because I can hold it'll hold wood up for me vertically, and I can get another piece of wood and work it until I need to do it. They're really nice. These are the other things out of all the tools. I say these are what gets used. Self-centering drill bit number 3, number 5 are the 2 best ones. You don't need a full set. I never use the bigger bits. The number 3 and number 5 for the screws for the drawer glides, because I'm using those all the time. I'm constantly using those self-centering drill bits. And it was funny because Facebook had like somebody was running an ad. Oh, look at this really cool invention. It's a self-centering drill bit. And I'm like, this thing's been around for a century. Why are you saying it's new, Facebook? But I love these things. They're great. The acid brushes we've talked about. Countersink drill bit. For just getting a head of a screw underneath the surface of a wood so it's not protruding. These things work great, and they work for a wide variety of ranges. So you don't have to have a different size for each different screw. You can just have one. The block plane. Out of all my hand planes, and I've got about 8 or 9 hand planes, this thing gets used way more than everything else. A small little block plane just for taking a little bit of wood off this thing is wonderful. You don't have to buy Shop Fox. You can buy a Stanley, you can buy Harbor Freight, whatever you want to buy, but a block plane I've found to be just invaluable. Paste wax for screws. When you go to put a screw in wood, if you just dip it in paste wax before you screw that in, you can reduce the possibility of splitting your wood a great amount. Because as you're screwing that screw in, it'll build up heat, and it's going to force that thing in there. And with paste wax, it just glides in, and just coating that screw a little bit before you screw it into the wood will prevent a lot of splitting that you do. And I love digital calipers. Once I got to digital caliper, because invariably I plane my wood, I screw something up, and remember, I don't plane everything to one dimension, right? This helps me get back to where I was at. So if I have to redo a piece of wood. The other things is a dead blow hammer. If you don't have a dead blow hammer to pound, if you're doing a table glue up and you got your cauls on there and it's clamped, but it's still protruding a little bit, you want to get that thing flat, that dead blow hammer is going to help you. And it's great for putting together finger joints. It's great for getting apart things too. When you put something together as a dry fit and then you want to pop it back out, a dead blow hammer won't do it, damage your wood, and it's great. Headlamps. I'm always peering into drawers and different things, under tools. Headlamps are wonderful. Chalk. I fell in love with chalk to mark all of my wood. You can use it for your tenons. On your mortise and tenon, you just put a little bit of chalk on your tenon, jab it down into your mortise, and it'll tell you exactly where you got to trim. You can use it for... I like it to mark my wood so that when I'm putting a table together with 4 or 5 pieces, I'll run a line across it, and then I know that's how I want those pieces to go, because you get the table all put together, you go edge join them and you bring them back, and then you're like, wait a minute, which board was which board again? Hey, you don't have to worry about it. Just run a piece of chalk over it and it wipes right off. I love the straight edges. They're great. Pipe clamps, while I use the parallel clamps the vast majority of the time, having pipe clamps in 10-foot and 8-foot lengths is great, because those pipe clamps can go to any length of pipe. You just got to have the pipe hanging around in your shop, and they're very helpful to use. If I was to name products, and I think this is the last slide, pretty close to it if not, these are the things that I have found to be the best. There's a lot of tape measures, and I've went through a lot of tape measures. This Stanley, and this Stanley, don't get the Fat Max. I can't stand the Fat Max, but this thing has just a right combination of laying just flat enough, but able to throw out a good 8 feet straight without having to have it, crinkle and bend over. I love this tape measure. Trans tint dies. This is the Jeff Jewett Homestead finishing product that I was telling you about. These dies are amazing. When you want to do color matching, you want to do just to get a different color out of your wood. He has a wide variety of these colors, and they are absolutely wonderful. They're a water-based product. You can also tone with it. He has another product if you want to mix it with oil, but to get a mixture and get the right color that you want, you can get golden brown, dark walnut. You can get different colors, and you can eyedropper it into a little pixie cup and get that dye just the right color that you want to get it. They're wonderful. For sharpening, I've tried everything. I've tried 10 different types of sharpening. I love this Work Sharp. It is for doing chisels and hand plane blades. This thing is the cat's meow. I've spent money on Tormek and Jet and $500, and I don't like them nearly as much as I like this Work Sharp. And the Craig pocket hole screw kit, I use that all the time. So that's the last slide. Now we get to questions. I see a lot of questions coming by. So how do you keep these long track jigs from warping? That's an interesting question. I guess I haven't had that issue. I hang them up on a wall in my shop, so you can't see it in the picture there, but I can see where if you had it laying down on a surface, it could warp because it's going to get moisture on one side and not moisture on the other side. But if you start off with plywood's pretty stable, and so you shouldn't have a great deal of warpage if you use plywood. If you use solid wood, I would see you would have more of an issue with that. But I haven't had an issue with my jigs from warping. Okay. So another question I saw is, does wax on a screw allow the screw to back out or come loose easier? That's an interesting question. I would say that yes, that does allow it to come loose easier, but in most cases, it's not going to come out. So the good news is like when I put together any kind of woodworking with drawer slides, I always pre-drill my drawer slides and mount them and get all my drawers going, and then I disassemble everything to sand it and finish it. And you don't want screws going in and out a lot, but the paste wax does make it nice to be able to get those screws out. And I've never had an issue of one coming loose. So I'm not sure if you're worried about that or if you're just wondering, because sometimes you put a screw in and it's hard to get out. It's like you end up stripping the head just to get it back out because it got so tight to go in there. And I think that's maybe what you were asking, but and that's why paste wax is nice because it helps the screw go in, and then when you need to get it out to disassemble and then re-put it back in later after you've put all the finishing on it, it's nice because you're not stripping heads and they do come out, but it doesn't get too loose. So if that was what your worry was, someone made a comment, all the transient colors are available at Woodcraft. That's absolutely right. Yeah, they've got them at Woodcraft, and I think it's like $17.95 a bottle or $18.95. They're per bottle, and the bottles, they're tiny. They're little 2-ounce bottles, but you know what? Those things will last me years because you don't need a lot of dye to do a lot of coloring. Dye goes a long way. I mix my drops. I count my drops, and it allows me to fine tune it. And like I told Gary, we were mentioning before the meeting starting, I could do a whole hour-long session on how to do color matching with those dyes. And I think that might be something people might like to do at some point, but because color matching is important. Let's see, what do you use for the base on the tracks? 1/4-inch ply. I've seen different people do different things. I happen to use the 1/4-inch ply, but I watched a YouTube video by a guy who did one of these, and he had a really good suggestion. And his was, go get a piece of plywood, 3/4-inch plywood, and use the factory edge as your edge for your straight piece, that not the piece that you're going to cut through, but the piece that you screw into your track, to use that factory edge. So that, because if you're creating, what's the rail that the circular saw is going to ride against, you want that to be straight. And so his idea was to use the factory edge on a piece of plywood, and I thought that was a great idea. Now, I'm trying to think. I think he just ended up using the 3/4 inch because he bought the 3/4 inch to get the factory edge. I would say that it shouldn't matter what you use. If I were to do mine all over again, I'd probably use the Baltic birch because I love that stuff. It's just so stable and it's so firm. I would probably use a 1/2 inch Baltic birch, but it really comes down to weight. If you're going to have a shorter track that you're going to make, then I would do 1/2 inch. And if you're going to do a longer one, and for weight, might drop it down to 1/4 inch. But you can use Baltic birch as your bottom plate. But your top edge, it's a really good idea. I saw in this guy's YouTube video is to get a piece of plywood and use that factory edge to be your guide that your saw's going to run against. I thought that was really, really good. Someone had a comment here about The Hounded Eye is a good graphical book. Oh, okay, yeah. Oh, I haven't heard of that one. I'll have to look at that. That's a good suggestion. Besides pocket screws and mortise and tenoring, what kind of joiner do I use? That's an interesting question. Yeah, I use what the piece needs. I've used half flap. I've used finger joints. I love mortise and tenon. I love the through wedge tenon. I do not use biscuits at all. I think biscuits are a marketing ploy. And the reason I think that is because a dado does everything a biscuit will do, and it does it better. And so I got a biscuit joiner. I had a nice one, and I used it, and I just grew frustrated with it because during the glue ups, when you go to glue that up and you're trying to get that in, and you got 4 pieces, and you're trying to get the 2 pieces together, it was really frustrating. And I sold it, and I started using dados. And you know what? And use a dado, it does all the alignment that a biscuit does. It's a stronger joint because you have more glue surface around the dado, and it's easy to put together because it just goes together when you go to do your glue up. It's not as fussy. So your mileage may vary. Maybe I didn't figure out biscuits the way they should be used, but I like to use that. Just going through the questions in chat. So I think we've only got a few more left here.
Okay.
I would say, oh yeah, someone confirmed that they use the factory edge and MDF to make a couple of those tracks. So that's good. And when you're backing out screws that have been countersunk, how do you prevent tear out? That would be on an older piece. I would be thinking about how to do that. I guess I would be less concerned about tear out on backing a screw out that's been countersunk than fixing it, because that's one of the. I could have another whole session on how to repair stuff. I mentioned it offhand in a forum the other day. If you get a loose screw hole, you have 2 options. You can get a bigger screw that has bigger threads and put it in the same hole, and if that works, then it works. If that doesn't work, then what you really need to do is you need to take a drill bit, you need to core it out completely and get a dowel. So you can take, say, for example, a 1/2 inch dowel. You drill a 1/2 inch hole, you put glue on it, you tap that dowel into a screw hole that was there, you now completely eliminated, and you flush trim that and sand the dowel down, and then now you have a fresh surface. Now you can re-drill a hole and re-drill your screw into that hole. So yeah, I'm not sure about tear out when I'm backing a screw out, but I would say repairing is something else to think about. So I don't know if I missed. Let's see. That's about it. That's all the